Level 1. The mountain of paper. You sit in the suffocating silence of your secure office, staring blankly at the massive, towering stacks of green paper resting heavily upon your mahogany desk. To the average, uninitiated person walking the streets below, this staggering pile of currency represents a lifetime of impossible dreams finally realized in physical form. But to you, a prisoner of your own exceptional intellect, it is merely a highly toxic substance that desperately needs to be cleansed before it poisons you. The brutal overlords of the cartel do not understand the intricate, unforgiving complexities of the modern global financial system. They only understand the language of extreme violence, the brutal expansion of their territory, and the sheer, overwhelming volume of their illicit harvest. When their lethal product successfully crosses the guarded borders, it instantly transforms from a highly sought-after powder into a logistical nightmare of raw, incredibly heavy physical currency. Your sole, terrifying purpose in this criminal ecosystem is to make this deeply tainted paper disappear seamlessly into the legitimate, pulsating veins of the global economy. Every single week, heavily armed men without names or faces drop off dozens of heavy, bursting duffel bags that reek permanently of damp mold, nervous sweat, and cheap cologne. You have essentially become the ultimate, most highly compensated janitor of the criminal underworld, tasked with wiping away the blood and the sin. The very first step of this arduous journey is always the most physically dangerous. A terrifying initial injection process they coldly refer to as the placement. You are acutely aware that you cannot simply walk into a reputable commercial bank and casually deposit $10 million of street money without triggering every alarm. Instead, you must painstakingly break this mountainous liability down into thousands upon thousands of virtually invisible, unremarkable grains of financial sand. You secretly employ a vast, decentralized army of smurfs, a collection of desperate, broken people who will happily make small, structured deposits just strictly under the federal reporting threshold. Each meticulously planned deposit must be exactly $9,999, leaving absolutely no margin for human error. If just one of these desperate individuals makes a careless mistake or speaks out of turn, the highly tuned algorithms of the Federal Reserve will immediately flag the glaring anomaly. A single tiny red flag generated by a careless smurf could bring the entire multi-billion-dollar empire crashing down violently upon your fragile head. You exist entirely in a constant, paralyzing state of hypervigilance, fully understanding that a simple, easily overlooked clerical error equates directly to a horrific death sentence. The encrypted digital ledger is your only holy book, and the endless rows of perfect numbers are your only flimsy shield against the cartel's legendary, unspeakable wrath. Every single dirty dollar must be meticulously accounted for, secretly tracked, and independently verified before it can even begin its long, convoluted journey toward legitimacy. Restful sleep is a luxury you permanently abandoned many years ago, exactly on the night when you first accepted this lucrative but deeply poisoned chalice. You slowly realize that you are permanently trapped in an inescapable golden cage, entirely surrounded by limitless wealth that you can never, ever truly spend or enjoy. Level 2. The layering process. Once the tainted cash is successfully injected into the rigid banking system, it must be aggressively spun around until its dark origin is entirely and permanently obscured. You sit at your glowing console and initiate thousands of rapid, automated wire transfers, sending the funds bouncing chaotically across dozens of monitored international borders. The money flows invisibly, like water through a complex labyrinth of ghost companies, all legally registered in distant jurisdictions that intentionally ask absolutely no questions. A tiny rusted post office box located on a rainy street in the Cayman Islands suddenly becomes the proud legal owner of a highly profitable consulting firm headquartered in Cyprus. That shadowy Cyprus firm then immediately issues a massive, completely uncollateralized loan to a newly formed real estate holding company operating out of a strip mall in Delaware. By the time the laundered funds complete their third, dizzying orbit around the globe, the original paper trail is hopelessly, permanently fragmented beyond the comprehension of any forensic accountant. You are a master illusionist, successfully burying the grim truth beneath towering mountains of fabricated corporate paperwork and an endless stream of meaningless digital noise. You create an impenetrable smokescreen of shell corporations, offshore trusts, and phantom directors who exist entirely on fraudulent digital documents. The relentless humming of the cooling fans in your subterranean server farm is the only lullaby that ever graces your exhausted ears. Every single transaction must look painfully boring, aggressively normal, and entirely devoid of any criminal excitement. You find yourself obsessively refreshing the screen of your encrypted laptop, terrified that a sudden red flag from global authorities might unexpectedly freeze your master accounts. The sheer volume of the illicit capital is a suffocating ocean that threatens to drown your mind if you pause for even a single second. You are a ghost operating within a complex machine, quietly manipulating the gross domestic products of small nations with a few keystrokes from a cold basement. The cartel bosses do not care about the intricate beauty of your digital architecture. They only demand their cleaned capital returned on a rigid, unforgiving schedule. Level 3. The integration. The final, crucial phase of your dark alchemy requires transforming this scattered, invisible wealth back into highly tangible, undeniable physical asset. You cannot simply wire hundreds of millions of dollars back to the drug lords without raising immediate, fatal suspicions from global regulatory bodies. Instead, you must carefully curate a massive portfolio of legitimate investments, effectively making the cartel appear to be brilliant, visionary businessmen. You secretly purchase sprawling luxury resorts on pristine coastlines, massive commercial skyscrapers and bustling metropolises, and vast tracts of fertile agricultural land. These towering monuments of concrete and glass serve as the perfect, untouchable vaults for the unimaginable suffering harvested on the bloody streets. You orchestrate the aggressive acquisition of seemingly failing, cash-heavy businesses, ranging from quiet regional casinos to massive industrial laundromats. These front companies suddenly and miraculously report unprecedented, record-breaking profits, cleverly masking the continuous injection of the cartel's endless street revenue. You even venture into the highly subjective, deeply opaque world of fine art, purchasing hideous, abstract paintings for utterly ridiculous, inflated sums at elite auctions. A canvas smeared with random paint easily crosses international borders without inspection, magically holding $50 million of laundered value within its wooden frame. Every single asset you acquire is another heavy chain binding you forever to the cartel, a permanent record of your irreversible complicity in their ongoing atrocities. You sit in boardrooms surrounded by highly educated, respected executives who have absolutely no idea that their massive salaries are funded entirely by pure human misery. You smile tightly and shake their soft, clean hands, silently disgusted by their willful ignorance and your own inescapable, damning hypocrisy. Level 4. The facade. To the outside world, you are a highly successful, aggressively private wealth management consultant, catering exclusively to a very select, ultra-high net worth clientele. You wear impeccably tailored, bespoke gray suits that cost more than most honest, hardworking citizens earn in a grueling, back-breaking year. You dine alone in impossibly expensive, exclusive restaurants, tasting absolutely nothing as you chew mechanically on heavily seasoned, overpriced cuts of rare meat. The luxury you surround yourself with is not a reward, but rather an incredibly expensive, carefully constructed camouflage designed to deflect any unwanted scrutiny. You own a sprawling, minimalist mansion in an elite gated community, yet you spend all your time locked inside a single, heavily reinforced panic room. The vast, empty halls of your sterile home echo constantly with the terrifying, deafening silence of your profound, unprecedented isolation. You have no true friends, no loving family, and absolutely no genuine human connections, because anyone close to you automatically becomes a fatal vulnerability. If the federal authorities ever finally manage to breach your digital fortress, they will ruthlessly leverage your loved ones to force a full confession. And if the volatile cartel bosses even briefly suspect you of cooperating, they will slowly butcher everyone you have ever cared about right in front of your open eyes. Level 5. The paranoia. You exist entirely within a claustrophobic, suffocating mental prison, where every single shifting shadow creeping across the cold pavement morphs instantly into a heavily armed federal surveillance team assigned exclusively to monitor your every single breath. The mundane, everyday sounds of the bustling city outside your reinforced, bulletproof window have slowly transformed into a terrifying, continuous symphony of impending doom and imminent violent capture. You find yourself spending agonizing, sleepless hours, meticulously dismantling every single electronic device in your sterile apartment, desperately searching for hidden microtransmitters that probably do not even exist. A completely innocent, fleeting glance from a tired barista handing you your morning espresso is suddenly interpreted by your heavily fractured, exhausted mind as a highly coordinated undercover sting operation about to execute an arrest warrant. The crushing psychological weight of constantly carrying thousands of the cartel's darkest, bloodiest secrets has completely and permanently eroded your fundamental capacity to trust another living human being on this earth. You meticulously burn every single physical piece of paper that passes through your trembling hands, reducing innocuous grocery receipts and complex financial ledgers alike to indistinguishable gray piles of useless ash. Your primary method of communication relies entirely on an endless, rotating supply of cheap, untraceable disposable burner phones that you systematically destroy and discard after sending a single, highly cryptic text message. The once comforting illusion of basic personal privacy has been violently stripped away from your daily existence, replaced entirely by the chilling, inescapable certainty that you are always being intensely, clinically watched by unseen enemies. You frequently experience vivid, paralyzing waking nightmares, where the meticulously constructed walls of your fake corporate empire suddenly collapse, burying you alive beneath a suffocating, inescapable avalanche of highly toxic, dirty currency. Every unexpected, sudden knock on your heavy, reinforced steel front door sends violent, uncontrollable tremors of primal, animalistic terror echoing deeply through your severely deteriorating, exhausted nervous system. You have voluntarily transformed yourself into a highly functioning, impeccably dressed ghost, carefully erasing your digital and physical footprints with the obsessive, terrified precision of a continuously hunted, desperate animal. Level 6. The audit. The brutal, unforgiving reality of your dark profession constantly dictates that the most terrifying, existential threat does not actually come from the meticulous, slow-moving investigations of international law enforcement agencies. The true, paralyzing nightmare immediately begins when the utterly merciless, dead-eyed lieutenants of the cartel suddenly demand a comprehensive, highly detailed, in-person accounting of their deeply laundered, untraceable funds. These heavily armed, unspeakably violent men do not possess the necessary intellectual capacity to understand natural, unavoidable market fluctuations, or the complex, temporary liquidity issues inherent in global corporate finance. They only comprehend absolute, immediate perfection, and any perceived delay or minor discrepancy in their expected financial return is instantly categorized as an act of high treason, punishable by unimaginably cruel torture. You sit trembling slightly in a dimly lit, soundproofed basement, projecting highly complex, perfectly sanitized spreadsheets onto a stained concrete wall, for men who prefer to settle all their personal disputes with rusty industrial chainsaws. Every single digit you present must perfectly and immaculately align with their impossible expectations, as a simple, innocent mathematical error rounding to the wrong decimal point will undoubtedly result in your immediate, excruciating execution. You watch in silent, suffocating terror as their cold, unblinking eyes slowly scan the columns of fabricated profits, praying frantically to a forgotten god that they do not possess the acumen to notice the aggressive, artificial inflation. The stale, stagnant air in the windowless interrogation room is incredibly heavy, thick with the overwhelming metallic scent of stale blood, nervous human sweat, and the constant, unspoken threat of horrific, blunt force violence. You are forcefully compelled to desperately explain the nuanced intricacies of international tax havens to a deeply impatient, sociopathic enforcer who is casually, mechanically cleaning his gold-plated handgun right across the table. The sheer, absurd juxtaposition of high-level, sophisticated corporate finance colliding so violently with raw, primitive street brutality constantly threatens to permanently fracture your fragile, crumbling, overtaxed sanity. You absolutely must project a convincing aura of absolute, unshakable confidence and total control, despite the undeniable biological fact that your racing heart is desperately pounding against your fragile ribs like a trapped, dying bird. A single tiny bead of nervous sweat slowly rolling down your pale, exhausted face could easily be misinterpreted by these paranoid killers as a damning confession of theft, instantly sealing your horrific, unavoidable fate. When the agonizingly tense meeting finally concludes and they silently depart with their newly authenticated financial portfolios, you immediately collapse and vomit violently into a nearby plastic trash bin from the sheer, overwhelming adrenaline dump. You fully, miserably understand that successfully surviving this particular audit merely resets the invisible, constantly ticking clock until the next inevitable and increasingly dangerous interrogation by your ruthless masters. Level 7. The Contagion. As the miserable years bleed together in a continuous, monotonous blur of high-stakes money laundering and constant terror, you begin to deeply notice the insidious, spreading corruption infecting the seemingly legitimate world around you. The massive, overwhelming tidal wave of illicit cartel cash you pump continuously into the global economy does not simply vanish into thin air without leaving a profound, deeply toxic stain on absolutely everything it touches. You watch local real estate markets hyperinflate into unsustainable, grotesque bubbles solely because you are aggressively laundering billions through anonymous, unyielding cash purchases of residential properties. Honest, hardworking families are permanently priced out of their own generational neighborhoods, forced into poverty by the invisible, catastrophic economic forces you relentlessly orchestrate from your dark basement. The supposedly clean politicians and esteemed corporate leaders you covertly bribe and manipulate slowly become inextricably reliant on the continuous flow of your tainted, bloody capital to fund their own corrupt ambitions. You have successfully weaponized the cartel's endless street violence, transforming raw, brutal crime into a highly sophisticated, systemic cancer that silently destroys the fundamental pillars of civil society from the inside out. The prestigious law firms and elite accounting agencies that eagerly accept your massive retainer fees are fully aware of your dark origins, yet they enthusiastically look the other way for a small taste of the boundless wealth. You realize with a sickening heavy dread that the entire global financial system is not a pristine, highly regulated machine, but rather a deeply compromised, fragile house of cards, sustained primarily by massive injections of criminal liquidity. You are no longer just a passive, terrified victim of the cartel, but rather a central, indispensable architect of a sprawling, worldwide economic dystopia that rewards ruthless violence and punishes honest labor. Every single time you execute a flawless, untraceable wire transfer, you are directly plunging an invisible, fatal dagger into the collective, beating heart of whatever remains of human morality and justice. Level 8. The Hollow Core. Despite having unrestricted, instantaneous access to more liquid capital than most sovereign nations, you discover a profound, bottomless emptiness festering deep within your own severely compromised, dying soul. The staggering, almost mythical sums of money you manipulate daily have completely lost their assigned numerical value, dissolving into a meaningless, endless stream of abstract zeros that bring absolutely no joy or comfort. You possess the theoretical financial power to purchase entire tropical islands or overthrow small, unstable governments, yet you cannot buy a single fleeting second of genuine peace, safety, or dreamless sleep. The magnificent, highly tailored gray suits you wear as defensive armor feel increasingly like a tight, suffocating straitjacket, tightly binding you to a miserable, high-stakes existence that you deeply despise. You look into the smudged, dark mirror of your sterile, lonely bathroom and realize you can no longer recognize the hollow, dead-eyed stranger staring blankly back at you through the gloom. All of your youthful, optimistic ambitions and moral boundaries were slowly, meticulously ground into fine, worthless dust by the relentless, crushing gravity of the cartel's insurmountable, bloody wealth. You are a phenomenally wealthy, highly functional ghost, haunting the sterile marble hallways of elite financial institutions while completely devoid of any remaining humanity, compassion, or basic empathy. The incredibly complex, decentralized financial networks you brilliantly engineered have ultimately become a massive, inescapable digital spiderweb, and you are entirely paralyzed at its dark, vibrating center. You vaguely remember a distant, almost mythological time when you actually felt human emotions like joy, sorrow, or love, before the endless rivers of dirty green paper washed it all away into the abyss. You have essentially traded your mortal soul to the cartel for a golden, impenetrable cage, only to realize far too late that the highly polished, locked door has absolutely no key handle on the inside. Level 9. The Tightening Noose. The agonizingly slow, inevitable collapse of your meticulously constructed empire begins not with a massive, dramatic raid, but with a tiny, seemingly insignificant investigative thread pulled by a relentless junior treasury agent. A minor, easily overlooked clerical error made by a careless offshore registered agent suddenly triggers an automated algorithmic red flag deep within the impenetrable, massive server farms of the federal banking regulators. You sit frozen in absolute paralyzing terror as you watch an encrypted dashboard slowly light up with cascading, catastrophic warnings, indicating that a highly classified, multi-agency financial freeze is currently underway. The massive, decentralized web of anonymous shell companies you spent a decade carefully building begins to rapidly disintegrate, crumbling under the sudden, immense pressure of international, coordinated subpoenas and asset seizures. Your dedicated, untraceable burner phones suddenly begin ringing endlessly with furious, panicked demands from the cartel's highest-ranking, most bloodthirsty lieutenants, demanding immediate, impossible explanations for their frozen, inaccessible billions. You painfully understand that the deeply corrupt, highly paid lawyers and elite bankers you enriched for years will immediately turn state's evidence, eagerly selling you out to save their own miserable, highly manicured skins. The suffocating, claustrophobic walls of your heavily armored panic room suddenly feel like the cold, unyielding sides of a massive, inescapable concrete tomb, slowly being lowered into the dark, unforgiving earth. You desperately, frantically attempt to initiate the complex, final emergency protocols to permanently wipe your remote, encrypted servers, but a sickening, flashing red error message confirms that the authorities have already severed your master access. There is absolutely nowhere left to run, no secret offshore haven secure enough, and no amount of highly laundered money sufficient to buy your way out of the horrific, violent retribution that is swiftly approaching your reinforced front door. You sit alone in the pitch blackness of your secure bunker, listening intently to the distant, terrifying sounds of heavy tactical boots and specialized breaching equipment echoing ominously through the sterile, empty hallways of your mansion. Level 10. The cycle. The massive, reinforced steel door of your impregnable sanctuary finally groans and violently buckles inward, ripped completely off its heavy hinges by a deafening, blinding, kinetic explosive breach. You are aggressively thrown violently to the cold concrete floor by heavily armored tactical operatives, their blinding weapon lights completely washing out your dilated, terrified eyes as they scream incomprehensible, deafening commands. The cold, unforgiving steel of heavy tactical handcuffs bites deeply into your pale wrists, officially marking the absolute, irreversible termination of your lucrative, blood-soaked career as the criminal underworld's premier financial architect. As you are roughly dragged out of your sprawling, sterile mansion and thrown into the back of a heavily armored transport vehicle, you do not feel an overwhelming sense of paralyzing fear, but rather a strange, hollow relief. You finally realize with absolute, crushing clarity that the federal authorities who just violently apprehended you have actually saved you from a much slower, infinitely more agonizing death at the cruel hands of the betrayed cartel. During the endless, monotonous months of grueling, high-pressure federal interrogations in brightly lit, windowless rooms, you meticulously detail the staggering, incomprehensible mechanics of your global money laundering apparatus. You carefully explain to the exhausted, overwhelmed prosecutors how billions of illicit, blood-stained dollars seamlessly flowed through highly respectable financial institutions that will ultimately face nothing more than a minor, easily affordable corporate fine. The highly educated, fiercely ambitious government agents sit in stunned, uncomfortable silence as they begin to fully comprehend the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the systemic, deeply ingrained corruption you effortlessly orchestrated on a daily basis. But deep down in your fractured, isolated mind, you carry a dark, cynical secret that you do not bother to share with the triumphant, backslapping federal task force celebrating your unprecedented, historic capture. You understand with absolute, depressing certainty that your highly publicized arrest and subsequent maximum security incarceration will not actually disrupt the cartel's massive, global operations for more than a few fleeting, insignificant hours. Before the heavy iron bars of your tiny, permanently isolated Supermax prison cell even slide shut for the very first time, the ruthless syndicate has already seamlessly appointed your hungry, ambitious, and highly capable successor. Somewhere in a gleaming, modern skyscraper overlooking a bustling, ignorant metropolis, another brilliant, morally compromised financial prodigy is currently sitting down at a sleek mahogany desk, staring blankly at a terrifying mountain of dirty, wrinkled $100 bills. They will eagerly inherit your massive, decentralized network of anonymous offshore shell corporations, effortlessly bypassing the minor, temporary roadblocks erected by your comprehensive, detailed federal confession. The new architect will falsely believe that they are infinitely smarter, vastly more cautious, and highly superior to you, utterly convinced that they can successfully tame the brutal, uncontrollable beast of the global narcotics trade. They will slowly, inevitably, succumb to the exact same paralyzing, suffocating paranoia, spending their miserable, isolated nights frantically dismantling smoke detectors and obsessively checking encrypted international banking ledgers in absolute trembling terror. The endless, roaring river of dirty, blood-soaked currency will continue to violently flow across heavily militarized borders, demanding to be relentlessly cleansed and forcefully injected back into the legitimate, desperate veins of the global economy. You have been permanently reduced to a meaningless, easily forgotten footnote in a classified government dossier, while the massive, insatiable machine you helped meticulously build continues to ruthlessly grind human lives into fine, profitable dust. The sprawling luxury resorts, the towering commercial skyscrapers, and the seemingly legitimate front businesses you acquired will silently continue to generate massive, untraceable profits for men who casually murder innocent families with blunt machetes. The deeply compromised global financial system remains entirely addicted to the massive, stabilizing liquidity provided by the criminal underworld, ensuring that the horrifying, bloody cycle of supply and demand will never, ever truly end. You spend your remaining miserable decades sitting in absolute, terrifying silence in a tiny gray concrete box, completely stripped of your bespoke suits, your encrypted laptops, and your hollow, superficial power. Your once brilliant, highly analytical mind slowly begins to rot and deteriorate in the crushing, sensory-deprived isolation of the Supermax facility, leaving you with nothing but the haunting, vivid memories of the innocent lives you indirectly destroyed. You stare blankly at the rough, stained concrete wall of your tiny cell, hallucinating endless, cascading rows of glowing green numbers that slowly morph into the terrified, screaming faces of the cartel's countless, nameless victims. There is absolutely no redemption available for a soul as deeply, permanently stained as yours. No amount of cooperative federal testimony that can ever truly wash away the staggering volume of innocent blood heavily coating your invisible, trembling hands. You are officially dead to the outside world, a highly functioning ghost permanently trapped in a brutal, unforgiving purgatory constructed of cold iron bars, scheduled head counts, and overwhelming, crushing regret. The bitter, inescapable irony is that you finally achieve the total, absolute isolation you always subconsciously craved, permanently protected from the cartel's wrath, but forever imprisoned by the agonizing, heavy weight of your own unforgivable sins. Outside the heavily fortified, razor-wire fences of your bleak prison, the massive, unfeeling world continues to spin, entirely fueled by the exact same dark, illicit capital you spent your entire adult life meticulously hiding in plain sight. The global drug war is revealed to be nothing more than a highly profitable perpetual motion machine, an elaborate, violent theatrical performance where both the ruthless cartels and the ambitious law enforcement agencies are entirely dependent upon one another for their continued, bloated existence. You close your tired, hollow eyes and finally surrender entirely to the crushing, absolute darkness, knowing that the relentless, unforgiving cycle of blood, money, and systemic corruption will continue to outlive us all until the very end of human history. The master launderer has finally been permanently washed away, but the dark, insidious stain you left upon the world will never, ever fade.